All right, today we're talking about hypothesis testing. And to begin with, I wanted to go back to the example that I gave yesterday of a poll showing that 60% of students at Higley like math. And remember with that poll, so we had 60% was our result, but we said that there was a margin of error of plus or minus 10%, which meant that our confidence interval was between 50% and 70%. And we said that that confidence interval meant that we have we're 95% confident that the actual result, the actual percentage of students that like math at Higley is somewhere between 50% and 70%. All right, so that was the result of our poll. It was just an observational study. We just needed to know how many people liked math or what percentage of people liked math. So let's say now that we want to do an experiment. We want to actually see if we can improve this number, if we can do something to make more people like math. So let's say that somebody comes along and says, you know what, a lot of people like English, and I think it might be because of all the Socratic seminars they do. So what we should do in math to make people like math more is introduce Socratic seminars in math class. So, so we go out and all the math teachers at Higley start doing Socratic seminars once a week. And we let this go on for a month or two, and then we do another poll to see if more people like math now. And let's say the poll shows that 70% of people now say that they like math. Have we proven that Socratic seminars help people like math more? Well, maybe, maybe not. 70% is definitely higher than 60%. But remember that 70% was within our margin of error. It was at the very high end of our confidence interval. But remember at the very beginning, we said that we were 95% confident that that initial poll, that the actual result was between 50 and 70%. So it could be that it's just coincidence that our second poll was higher. Maybe we just got a different group of people, and that higher poll number had nothing to do with the introduction of Socratic seminars. So what we need to do is we need to figure out some way of figuring out whether or not that is significant. That increase in the number of people that like math is significant. And that's what hypothesis testing is all about. So today we're going to talk about two different hypotheses. The null hypothesis, which we're going to call H naught. It's just H with a little 0 subscript. And the alternative hypothesis, which we're going to call HA, H sub A. All right, so the null hypothesis is that nothing is going to happen as a result of your test or your experiment. The alternative hypothesis is that something is going to happen. So in our case, the null hypothesis is going to be that nothing is going to change. More people are not going to like math because we introduced Socratic seminars. And the alternative hypothesis then would be that something will change, that more people will like math if we start doing Socratic seminars. And then there's two possible outcomes. We can reject the null hypothesis. Remember, the null hypothesis said nothing's going to happen. So if we reject the null hypothesis, that means that something did happen, that we came up with some evidence that shows that more people like math if we introduce Socratic seminars. The other possible outcome is that we don't reject the null hypothesis. If we don't reject the null hypothesis, that means we didn't come up with enough evidence to show that that anything significant happened, that we improved the likability of math through Socratic seminars. So your your worksheet today is titled Formulating Hypotheses. And there's the problems on here each ask you to first state the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis, and then to describe the two possible outcomes of the test. So remember, the two possible outcomes are always that we reject the null hypothesis or that we don't reject the null hypothesis. All right, so let's do number one, and then I'll leave you to do the last five. Number one says a college president claims that the 6-year graduation rate at her college is higher than the state average of 42%. And part A says, it asks us to state the null and alternative hypotheses for the hypothesis test. So the null hypothesis, remember, is that nothing is going to happen. So the null hypothesis is going to be that the graduation rate is equal to 42%. Graduation rate is just the same as the state average. That's our null hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis, which is what the college president is proposing, is that the graduation rate is higher than 42%. All right, so those are our two hypotheses. The null hypothesis is that the graduation rate is just what the state average is. The alternative hypothesis is that the graduation rate is higher than the state average, which is what the college president claims. All right, part B, describe the two possible outcomes of the test. Well, the first outcome is that we reject the null hypothesis. If we reject the null hypothesis, then that means that the college president is right, that the graduation rate at her college is higher than the state average. So that would be the result of rejecting the null hypothesis. If we don't reject the null hypothesis, that means that we haven't found enough evidence to prove that the graduation rate is higher than 42%. All right, so that's number one. You have 5 more to do. Good luck.